So, for my first video, I would like to talk about cultural changes and how these changes can be observed through fiction. And maybe more specifically, how these changes relate to things such as gender dynamics and dating. So I thought a good place to start would be The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid was originally written by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen in the 1830s. It's of course a classic fairy tale story, which diverged from other popular genres at the time. For example, the folk tales, where the fairy tales tended to have more complex psychological themes. But I think it's actually very interesting to notice what Disney did with their version of the story. But I think before any form of comparison can be made, you have to make sure that they are actually comparable. Hans Christian Andersen was, by all accounts, a pretty odd guy. He was a lone wolf and he had a lot of troubles in his life. Disney, on the other hand, is a giant corporation. But I think you can argue that these stories still hold very similar places in popular culture in their respective time periods. Not only did Hans Christian Andersen primarily write his stories for children, but his works were among the most, if not the most popular at the time in Denmark. And he was actually one of the few authors at the time who managed to become very rich and very famous during his lifetime. So I think when we look at the intended demographic and also at the cultural impact, that they are in fact very comparable. If we look at these stories through a critical lens, we'll notice that on surface level, no pun intended, even though there's a lot of similarities, the stories really diverge when it comes to the underlying narrative, but also the objective of the mermaid herself. In the original story, the mermaid's objective is actually attaining eternal life. But the eternal life is something that initially can only be obtained through being loved by the prince. But when it turns out the prince actually does not love her, she wants to return to the sea again. So the sea witch offers her a deal in which she can become a mermaid again, but only in exchange for killing the prince. But if she does not kill the prince, she will die. The mermaid then refuses to kill the prince and dies. But in the end, she actually attains eternal life through her sacrifice. So we can already see here that there's a big difference from the original version to the Disney version. There's a theme of self-sacrifice and a theme of not getting everything you want, but in the end getting what's most important. And these themes are completely absent in the Disney version. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the mermaid is actually pretty naive and pretty stupid in both stories. In both stories, she basically deserts her friends and her family because she's infatuated by the prince's good looks. But I think the theme of self-sacrifice and the theme of selfishness not always being ideal, or at the very least selfishness having a cost attached to it, makes the story, I wouldn't say it makes the story great, but it makes the story bearable. And what we have left when we extract these from the story is a mermaid who shits on everyone who cares about her. She deserts them because she finds a guy who's good looking. She then makes a deal with a sea witch. She almost ends up dead, but then gets saved by her dad the last minute, even though she shits on him the entire movie. And then at the end, she gets her fucking prince. And they're happily ever after. And I think this story says a lot about the modern female. It's basically a grand feminist narrative, this. It tells you that you don't have to take responsibility for anything, not your family, not your friends, not even for your own actions, and everything will just turn out fucking brilliant at the end anyway. And it doesn't help much, in all honesty, that Disney turned the prince into a pretty stupid guy who apparently sits daydreaming for several days in a row because the mermaid has such a beautiful singing voice. I thought it was pretty rich too, how he was almost manipulated into marrying a sea witch by the end, but instead he gets the mermaid. But I suppose in a scenario where the second best option is an evil sea witch, maybe a promiscuous, selfish mermaid with daddy issues isn't so bad after all. Now, I'm not a big traditionalist, I'll be honest, but this is a pretty long shot from the moral of self-sacrifice in the original story. The original story even goes so far as to encourage the female to sacrifice herself for the man, even if the man doesn't love her. It could be said that the shift in these narratives are a symptom of the problems, but I think they might also be a small part of how things have gone haywire. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this analysis was because I was talking to a female at my university who told me that this was her favorite Disney movie. And I actually ended up calling her out on it. First and foremost, telling her I thought it was a pretty bad movie, but also that I thought it was not very feminist. Ariel is not very independent, in any sense really. But she told me that she was aware of this, but anyhow, it was sort of a guilty pleasure for her. And I just want to let you guys know that this is sort of where we stand as a society when it comes to dating and relationships. We have a lot of narratives involving the independent female. And we also have a lot of examples of females who are maybe not so independent. But I think the element that's gone completely missing, or that is completely absent these days, is the self-sacrificing female. And as most guys in the manosphere knows, females are by nature not very self-sacrificing. At least not to the extent and in the same ways that males are. So it might be the case with these modern narratives that we're in fact amplifying or increasing a behavioral and psychological discrepancy between the sexes. On the bright side though, you can look forward to Disney's new version of The Little Mermaid, which I think is coming next year, and also starring a black female as Ariel. Anyways guys, thanks for listening and take care.